Young and vibrant, with a spirit as vast as the savannah, Lila danced beneath the velvet sky of the African night, her bare feet tracing the rhythms of ancient melodies on the warm earth. The crackling campfire cast shadows on the faces of the villagers, their laughter echoing through the darkness like the call of the hyena. Among them, she was the belle of the ball, her eyes sparkling brighter than the stars above. Little did she know that the whispers of fate had woven an unexpected thread into her life's tapestry, leading her to the opulent tent of a wealthy traveler, where she had been invited to spend the night as a gesture of hospitality. The rich man, with his foreign scent and alluring promises, offered her a glimpse of a world she had never dreamt of, a world of comfort and riches beyond the bounds of her humble village. Yet, as she stepped through the velvet flaps into the realm of silk and gold, she could not shake the feeling that the moon's watchful gaze held a warning unspoken. The tent was a sanctuary of opulence, the air thick with the scent of exotic spices and the sweet aroma of candles that flickered like the stars she had left behind. The rich man, his smile as warm as the fire that danced in his eyes, offered her a cup filled with an amber liquid that promised to ease her nerves. "Drink," he said, his voice as smooth as the silk that adorned the walls. "It is a gift from the finest vineyards across the sea." Lila hesitated, her suspicion piqued by the unfamiliar taste, but the promise of a night of respite from the hardships of village life was too tempting to resist. As the liquid trickled down her throat, it left a trail of warmth that seemed to spread through her veins, lulling her into a state of blissful relaxation. The hours that followed were a haze of soft music and honeyed words, the rich man showering her with compliments and telling tales of the wonders that lay beyond the horizon. His stories painted vivid pictures of bustling cities, towering palaces, and treasures that could grant any wish. Yet, beneath the veneer of charm, Lila felt a subtle current of something darker, a hunger in his gaze that sent shivers down her spine. She tried to focus on the beauty of the moment, but the more she drank, the heavier her eyelids grew, and the more her thoughts swirled like the patterns in the ornate rugs beneath her. The last thing she remembered before the curtain of oblivion fell was his hand, cool and firm, guiding her to a plush bed piled high with pillows and fur. When she awoke, the tent was suffused with the early morning light, the rich man's arm draped heavily across her waist. The air was thick with a sense of wrongness, a heaviness that clung to her skin like a shroud. Lila's heart pounded as she realized she was not alone. The man beside her stirred, his eyes opening to reveal a cold emptiness that sent a jolt of terror through her. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of the same amber liquid that had clouded her senses the night before. "You are mine," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "You will come to love me as I love you." Her body felt like it was made of lead, every limb refusing to move as he tightened his grip. The world outside the tent was quiet, the village still lost in the embrace of slumber. She knew she had to act, to escape before the day grew any brighter and her fate was sealed. Summoning all her strength, she pushed against him, but he only chuckled, his grip unyielding. "You will learn," he said, his eyes gleaming with a malicious delight. "You will learn to serve me as my mother did, and her mother before her." His words were a knife in her heart, a revelation that this was not the first time he had played this twisted game of seduction and domination. Lila's eyes darted around the tent, searching for anything that could help her. There, on the ornate table beside the bed, lay a sharp-looking letter opener, its silver gleaming in the dim light. With a silent prayer to the ancestors, she reached out, her hand shaking with fear and determination. As she grasped the handle, she felt a surge of energy, a sudden clarity that told her she could not, would not, become another pawn in his twisted play for power. With a swift motion, she brought the letter opener to the rich man's neck, the metal pressing into his flesh. He froze, his eyes widening in surprise. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice trembling but firm. The rich man's smile never wavered, his eyes cold and calculating. "My dear," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you do not understand the gravity of your situation. You are nothing but a mere girl from a forgotten village. What could you possibly do to me?" His hand reached for her, but she pushed it away, the letter opener still firmly in place. "I may be from a simple village," she spat back, her voice laced with the fire of 1,000 suns, "but I am not a thing to be owned. I am Lila, daughter of the soil and the sky, and I will not be your possession." She could feel the weight of the blade in her hand, the power it offered. It was a power she had never known, a power that could cut through the chains of fear that had bound her. The rich man's eyes narrowed, the smugness of his expression slipping to reveal the monster beneath. His hand shot out, faster than a striking snake, trying to snatch the letter opener from her grip. But Lila was ready. She had faced the fiercest beasts of the savannah, and she was not about to be bested by this man. With a strength born of desperation, she held the weapon firm, the tip digging into his flesh. A bead of blood formed and grew, threatening to spill. The man's smile disappeared, replaced by a snarl of anger. "You dare to defy me?" he hissed, his grip on her tightening. Lila felt the warmth of his blood trickle down her hand, but she did not falter. "I dare," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "for I am not yours to claim." The rich man's face contorted into a mask of rage, his eyes flashing like the eyes of a cornered predator. He lunged at her, his movements surprisingly swift for a man his size. But Lila was not to be underestimated. Years of running and playing in the wild savannah had honed her reflexes and taught her the art of evasion. She rolled away from the bed, bringing the letter opener with her, the point still aimed at his chest. As she stood up, she could feel the strength of the ancestors flowing through her, urging her to fight. "You will regret this," he snarled, advancing on her with a predatory stride. His hand reached for the opener, but she was too quick. With a swift twist of her wrist, she sliced through the air, leaving a shallow cut across the back of his hand. He howled in pain and surprise, recoiling from her. Seizing the moment, Lila bolted for the tense entrance, the heavy fabric parting before her like a sea of gold. The cool pre-dawn air hit her like a slap, invigorating her senses. The world outside was a blur of shadows and shapes, but she knew the layout of the village like the back of her hand. Her heart pounded in her chest, a wild drumbeat urging her to run faster. The sound of his furious shouts grew fainter behind her, but she knew he would not give up easily. He had tasted power, and now it was her turn to elude his grasp. As she sprinted through the quiet village, the occasional sleepy chicken squawked in protest at her passing. The thatched rooftops looked almost peaceful in the soft light, but she knew the horror that lay beneath one of them. Her thoughts raced as she searched for a place to hide, to gather her thoughts and decide her next move. The village elders had always taught her that wisdom was the greatest weapon, but she had never felt so ill-prepared for the battle that life had thrust upon her. The rich man's tent loomed behind her, a beacon of the horror she had just escaped. She knew she could not stay in the village, not with him and his men searching for her. They would not stop until they had her back, their pride and greed driving them to hunt her like the wild animals they thought she was. Lila's mind raced with the names of distant relatives and friends she could seek refuge with, but fear clutched at her heart. What if she brought danger to their doorsteps too? Her bare feet pounded the dirt path as she approached the village edge, where the grass grew tall and the whispers of the savannah called to her. The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart hammering against her ribs as if it would break free. The sounds of the awakening village grew distant, replaced by the comforting whispers of the wind and the rustle of the grass. She spotted a small hut, slightly hidden by a copse of trees, and hoped it was abandoned. Ducking behind the hut, she took a moment to catch her breath, her back pressed against the cool mud wall. The rich man's tent was now out of sight, but she could still feel his malicious gaze on her, like a lion watching its prey. She knew she had to put as much distance between them as possible. The letter opener was still clutched in her hand, a cold reminder of what she had almost become. The door to the hut was a simple affair of woven grass, held in place by a wooden latch. Lila paused, listening intently for any signs of life within. Hearing nothing, she pushed it open a crack, peering inside. The hut was small and dark, but it was empty. She slipped inside, letting the door swing shut with a soft thud. The interior smelled faintly of smoke and herbs, the remnants of a previous occupant's meal, or perhaps a healing ceremony. It was a place of solace, a sanctuary from the horrors of the night. Her heart still racing, she collapsed onto the packed earth floor, the coolness of it seeping into her body and calming her somewhat. The walls were adorned with simple drawings, the strokes of a child's hand, depicting scenes of village life. They brought a bittersweet nostalgia, a reminder of the innocence she had left behind in the rich man's tent. The only light came from a small opening high up in the wall, allowing a shaft of early morning sunlight to pierce the darkness. It cast a golden beam onto a wooden chest in the corner, which she recognized as a storage trunk for sacred artifacts. Her thoughts turned to the villagers. Would they believe her story? Or would they see her as a temptress, lured by the glitz of a wealthier life? Her reputation, her very existence in the village, now felt as fragile as the dew-kissed blades of grass outside. Her hand tightened around the letter opener, her knuckles whitening as she contemplated her options. The first light of dawn began to creep into the hut, painting the wooden chest in the corner a gentle gold. Her eyes fell upon it, and she knew she could not leave without taking something to arm herself for the journey ahead. She approached the chest with a heavy heart, aware she was about to commit an act of desperation. The latch was old, but gave way with a soft click under her trembling hand. Inside, she found a collection of amulets and talismans, the sacred relics of her ancestors. At the very bottom, nestled in a bundle of cloth, lay a small, gleaming knife. Its blade was sharper than the rich man's smile, and it felt like a promise of protection in her palm. "The ancestors will guide me," she murmured, closing the chest with a silent apology to its rightful owner. "I will not let them down." With the knife tucked into her waistband, Lila took a deep, steadying breath and prepared to leave the sanctity of the hut. She knew she had to move quickly and quietly to avoid any prying eyes that might have been roused by the commotion. The savannah was her ally, her childhood playground, and she knew its secrets well. She could disappear into its vast expanse and find refuge until she figured out what to do next. As she crept towards the door, a soft rustle of grass outside made her freeze. The rich man's voice, now tinged with anger and desperation, pierced the early morning calm. "You cannot hide from me, girl," he called out, his words carrying on the wind. My men are searching the village as we speak. You will be found, and when you are, your punishment will be swift and severe." Her heart pounding, Lila realized she had underestimated his determination. She had to move now before his search party grew closer. With a silent prayer to the ancestors, she slipped out of the hut, the knife cold against her skin. The tall grass whispered secrets of her passage, the world around her coming to life with the promise of a new day. The sounds of the savannah grew louder in her ears, the distant roar of a lion, the call of a solitary bird, the whisper of a breeze through the acacia trees. They were her allies now, the guardians of her freedom. Moving swiftly and silently, she made her way through the village, sticking to the shadows and using the long grass to obscure her form. The rich man's voice grew fainter, his searchers still focused on the center of the village. She knew she had to move quickly, to put as much distance between herself and her pursuers as possible. The thought of facing them, of being dragged back to the tent, and the horror that awaited her, was almost too much to bear. As she approached the edge of the village, she spotted a group of his men, armed and searching with the cold efficiency of predators. Their eyes scanned the area, and for a moment she feared discovery. But the savannah was vast, and she was as much a part of it as the grass she moved through. She waited, her breath held, until they passed. Their footsteps grew fainter, the sound of their search receding into the distance. With a mix of relief and determination, Lila broke into a run, her legs carrying her away from the village she had once called home. The sun had fully risen now, casting a warm glow over the endless sea of grass and acacia trees. The savannah was a canvas of gold and green, a stark contrast to the cold, confining walls of the rich man's tent. She knew the dangers that lurked within this wilderness, the predators that ruled the day and night, but she also knew its mercy. It had always provided for her, taught her, and protected her. Now, it would be her sanctuary. As she ran, her mind raced with thoughts of her mother, her sisters, her friends. Would they believe her story, or would they be swayed by the rich man's gold and power? The thought of their doubt was a sharp pain in her heart, but she pushed it aside. She had to survive. She had to find a way to live free from his shadow. The savannah was a maze of tall grass and ancient trees, their gnarled branches reaching for the sky like the arms of giants. Lila weaved through them with the grace of a gazelle, her bare feet leaving no trace in the soft earth. She knew these lands like the back of her hand, every slope and hollow, every watering hole and hidden path. It was here she had played as a child, learning the ways of the wild and the wisdom of the elders. Now it was here she would find refuge. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew warmer, the heat of the day pressing down on her. She could feel the energy draining from her body, the night's events and her desperate flight taking their toll. Her legs ached and her lungs burned, but she did not dare to stop. The knife at her waist was a constant reminder of the danger she faced, a silent promise that she would not go back without a fight. In the distance, she spotted the shimmering blue line of a river, the lifeblood of the savannah. It was there she knew she could rest, if only for a moment. The promise of water was too tempting to resist, and she angled her path towards it, her eyes never leaving the horizon. As she drew closer, she saw a small herd of impala grazing peacefully beside the banks, their coats glistening with dew. The sight brought a small smile to her lips, a fleeting reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world beyond the horror of the rich man's tent. The river was a haven, its gentle murmur a lullaby that sang of home and safety. She knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink, the cool liquid washing away the bitterness of fear that had coated her tongue. As she drank, she watched the water, the way it flowed over her skin, and felt the strength of the current mirroring the determination that surged within her. Her reflection was a stark contrast to the serene scene, a wild-eyed girl with a knife at her waist and the shadow of a monster at her back. But she was not broken. Not yet. The riverbank was lined with flat rocks, worn smooth by centuries of water. Lila sat on one, the knife in her hand, her thoughts racing. She knew she could not stay here. The rich man would send his men to search the river. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for a place to hide, a way to vanish. And then she saw it. A cave, almost concealed by the overhang of a massive acacia tree. It was small, but it was enough. With renewed vigor, she sprinted towards the cave, her heart hammering in her chest. The mouth of the cave was shadowy, the coolness of the interior beckoning her. She ducked inside, her breathing heavy and ragged. The darkness was a comfort, a temporary reprieve from the world outside. The cave was shallow, but it was enough to hide her from any passing eyes. She leaned against the wall, the rough stone biting into her skin. "I will not let you win," she murmured to herself, the words echoing faintly in the small space. "I am not just a village girl to be used and discarded." The cave was a stark contrast to the rich man's tent, but it was a sanctuary she had earned with her own blood and sweat. She sat on the cold, hard ground, her back against the rock wall, the knife clutched tightly in her hand. The shadows danced with the flickering light that pierced through the cave's entrance, painting the space with an eerie glow. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she took stock of her meager supplies. Nothing but the knife and the tattered remnants of her dignity. Lila took a deep breath, the scent of earth and damp stone grounding her. She knew she had to act quickly. The rich man would not rest until he had her back under his control. He would use his power to manipulate the villagers, to turn her family and friends against her. She had to get ahead of him, to find a place where she could be safe and plan her next move. Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, growing louder by the second. Panic surged through her, and she considered her options. To stay hidden in the cave was to risk capture if they searched the area, but to run was to leave behind the only shelter she had. The sound grew closer, and she knew she had to act. With a tremble in her voice, she called out, "Who approaches?" A figure emerged from the swaying grass, riding a majestic zebra, its black and white stripes a stark pattern against the savanna's palette. The rider pulled back on the reins, and the animal came to a gentle halt. A young warrior, his skin the color of the earth and his eyes as sharp as the blade she held, peered into the cave. His expression was one of surprise, mixed with a hint of wariness. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice deep and soothing. "I am Tendo, of the Maasai people. What troubles you, child?" Lila's hand tightened around the knife, but she knew she could not fight a warrior on his own steed. She stepped out of the shadows, squinting against the sudden brightness of the sun. "I am Lila," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am being hunted." Tendo dismounted gracefully, his eyes never leaving hers. "What has happened?" he asked, his gaze flicking to the bloodstain on her hand and the letter opener that she had replaced with the knife. Lila took another deep breath, trying to steady herself. "A rich man from a distant land came to our village. He promised me a life of luxury, but it was a lie. He drugged me, and when I awoke, he said I was to be his." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, and she could feel the rage rising again at the memory of his touch. "I escaped, but he will not let me go. He has men searching for me, and if they find me, I fear for my life." Tendo studied her for a moment, his gaze assessing. Then he nodded, his face a mask of resolve. "You are safe with me, Lila," he said, his voice firm. "My people value honor and justice. We will not let him harm you." He offered her a hand, which she took tentatively. His grip was warm and strong, and she felt a flicker of hope in the face of his confidence. He helped her onto the zebra, which knelt obediently. The animal's muscles rippled beneath her as it stood, and she felt a strange sense of power atop such a creature. "Hold on tight," Tendo instructed, mounting behind her. His arms came around her waist, steadying her, and she could feel the heat of his body against her back. Despite the horror of her situation, a thrill of excitement shot through her. They rode away from the village, the zebra's hooves silent on the dew-covered grass. Tendo's grip was firm, his muscles tight as they moved in harmony with the animal's gait. The savanna unfolded before them, a vast, open expanse that both terrified and comforted her. "Where will we go?" she asked over the thundering of her own heart. "To my people," Tendo replied, his voice a gentle rumble in her ear. "The Maasai do not tolerate such behavior. You will be safe among us." Lila nodded, her grip on the zebra's mane tightening. The wind whipped her hair as they picked up speed, the savanna a blur of gold and green around them. She had heard tales of the Maasai, fierce warriors who lived in harmony with the land, but she had never imagined she would seek refuge with them. Yet, here she was, fleeing from the man who had tried to steal her freedom, riding into the arms of the unknown. The journey to the Maasai camp was a blur of endless grasslands and the occasional herd of antelope that scattered at their approach. Tendo spoke little, his focus on navigating the terrain and ensuring they remained hidden from any pursuers. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken understanding, the bond of shared adversity forging a connection she had never felt before. His arms remained wrapped around her, not to hold her captive, but to keep her steady. The warmth of his body was a comfort she hadn't realized she needed, a stark contrast to the coldness of the rich man's touch. As they approached the camp, the distant throb of drums grew louder, a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of Lila's own pulse. The tents of the Maasai were a vibrant splash of color against the earthy tones of the savanna, and the sight filled her with a strange mix of hope and trepidation. The zebra slowed its pace, and Tendo's grip on her tightened for a brief moment before he slid off the animal with the grace of a cat. He offered his hand to help her dismount, his eyes never leaving hers. "Welcome to my home, Lila," he said, his smile genuine and warm. The camp bustled with life, children playing in the dirt, women tending to the fires and livestock, and men speaking in hushed tones, their eyes on the horizon. They drew curious glances as Tendo led her through the maze of tents, the vibrant reds and blues of the fabric fluttering in the breeze. His hand was firm in hers, a silent promise of protection as they wove through the throng of people. The Maasai warrior took her to the center of the camp, where an elderly woman sat, her eyes wise and knowing. She regarded Lila with a mix of concern and curiosity as they approached. "Grandmother," Tendo said with a respectful bow, "this is Lila. She has suffered a great wrong and seeks refuge with us." The elder's gaze softened as she took in the trembling girl before her. She held out a gnarled hand, and Lila took it, feeling the strength and warmth that belied her frail appearance. "Welcome, child," she said, her voice a soothing melody. "The Maasai are your kin now, and we will protect you from those who wish you harm." Lila felt a lump form in her throat as she looked around at the unfamiliar faces, the alien world she had been thrust into. She swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. "Thank you," she managed to murmur. "But what of my family? My village?" The elder woman's expression grew serious. "We will send word, Lila," she assured her. "But for now, you must stay with us. The rich man's reach is long, and he will not rest until he finds you. We will not let that happen." Lila nodded, her eyes welling with tears of gratitude. The weight of her situation felt a little lighter with the Maasai's promise of protection. She looked up at Tendo, his face a mask of determination. "Thank you," she whispered. Tendo gave a single nod in response, his gaze never wavering from hers. "You must rest now," he said gently. "We have much to discuss and plan." The villagers of Lila's home, swayed by the rich man's lies and bribes, reject her story of assault. The whispers of her supposed transgressions spread like wildfire, leaving her reputation in tatters. Her family and friends, fearing the wrath of the rich man and his influence, cast her out, forcing her to accept Tendo's offer of marriage as her only means of protection and shelter within the Maasai community. "Is this truly what you wish, Lila?" Tendo asks, his voice gentle yet firm as they stand before the Maasai elders. "To become my wife?" Her eyes well with tears as she nods. "I have no other choice," she murmurs, the words thick in her throat. "My own people have turned their backs on me, but I promise to be a good wife to you, Tendo. I will honor your people and your ways." Tendo's expression is unreadable, but his hand squeezes hers reassuringly. "You do not have to choose out of fear, Lila," he says, his voice low. "You are more than a pawn in their games. But if this is truly your wish, then it shall be done." He turns to the elders. "We wish to be wed." The elder woman, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness, nods. "So it shall be. The ceremony will be performed at dusk. Until then, you shall rest and prepare. Tendo will show you to your new home." With a gentle tug, Tendo leads Lila through the maze of tents, her heart feeling heavier with each step. They stop before a tent larger than most, its vibrant colors telling the story of battles won and enemies defeated. "This will be ours," he says, his voice softer than she's ever heard it. "It is not a prison, Lila, but a sanctuary. Together, we will face whatever comes." As the days pass in the Maasai camp, Lila finds solace in Tendo's protection and care. Despite the forced nature of their union, she begins to appreciate the gentle warmth of his presence and the steadfast loyalty of the Maasai people. The tent becomes a haven from the harshness of the outside world, and she learns to appreciate the simplicity and strength of their life. Tendo teaches her their customs and the art of hunting, and she finds a newfound sense of belonging within the tribe. The love between them grows as they face the trials of their new life together, and Lila starts to feel a genuine affection for her husband. One evening, as they sit beside the fire outside their tent, sharing a meal of roasted game and talking about their day, Tendo looks at her with a serious expression. "Lila, I know this is not the life you dreamed of, but I want you to know that I am here for you. You do not have to be just my wife. You can be my partner, my equal." He takes her hand in his thumb tracing soothing circles on her palm. "Together, we can forge a future that is truly ours, not one dictated by fear or the whims of others." Thank you for listening to this story today. It's quite different, but I hope you liked it. If you want to hear more stories like this, then do subscribe to this channel and share it with your loved ones.